was washing my hands. I glanced up just for a second, and my reflection was already looking at me. I froze. My hands were still under the running water, but my reflection's hands had stopped moving. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, just enough to make my stomach turn. I shook it off, blaming exhaustion, stress, anything logical. But then last night it got worse. I was brushing my teeth, staring at my reflection when it smiled. I wasn't smiling. A cold wave of fear crawled down my spine. I stepped back, my breath catching in my throat, but my reflection stayed still. It just stood there grinning. And then, slowly, as if acknowledging that I had finally noticed, it raised its hand and waved. I ran out of the bathroom, slamming the door behind me. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might explode. I stood in the hallway, staring at the closed door, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Nothing. Minutes passed. The silence of my apartment pressed down on me, thick and suffocating. Finally, I gathered enough courage to open the door just a crack. The mirror stood there, innocent and unassuming, reflecting an empty bathroom. My reflection was back to normal, looking as it always had. Had I imagined it? I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that grin. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by stress. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. And tonight I found proof. It started the same way. I was in the bathroom again, staring at the mirror, forcing myself to confront my fear. I lifted my arm, moved my fingers, turned my head. Every movement was matched perfectly. I almost felt relieved. But then I noticed the background. In the reflection, my bedroom door was open. I turned my head slightly, glancing over my shoulder. The real door was closed. When I looked back at the mirror, something was stepping into my bedroom. It was just a shadow at first, barely more than a shape lurking in the doorway. But as I watched, frozen with terror, it moved closer. I couldn't see its face, just the outline of something tall, with long, bony fingers reaching toward the bed. And then, my reflection turned its head to look at me. Not the shadow. Me. My reflection, the one that was supposed to follow my movements, had turned its head independently, staring at me with wide, knowing eyes. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. Then the lights flickered, and for a split second, the shadow was gone. I stumbled backward, nearly falling into the sink. My reflection was normal again, mirroring my every move, no shadow in sight. But I knew what I had seen. Something had stepped into my room. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, clutching my phone, jumping at every creak and whisper in the dark. I wanted to leave, to run. But some twisted part of me needed to understand what was happening. Because if that thing in the mirror wasn't me, then where was the real me? I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The moment I turned off the lights, I felt something watching me. Every shadow in my apartment seemed darker, every sound sharper. I kept glancing at the bathroom mirror, half expecting my reflection to step out on its own. By 3 a.m., I was exhausted but too terrified to close my eyes. My mind kept replaying the moment, the shadow stepping into my bedroom, my reflection turning to look at me on its own. Had it been there before? Had I just never noticed? At 4 a.m., I made a decision. I grabbed the largest towel I could find and threw it over the bathroom mirror. Then I did the same with the bedroom vanity and the small decorative mirror in the hallway. By the time I was done, my hands were shaking, my pulse racing like I had just committed some crime. The apartment felt different now, heavier, as if something inside it was angry. I forced myself to lie down, phone clutched in my hand, blankets pulled tight around me. The covers felt like the only protection I had left. I kept the bedside lamp on, its weak yellow light barely cutting through the darkness. Minutes crawled by, and then the soft sound of fabric shifting. I sat up instantly, heart pounding. My first thought was that I had imagined it, but then I heard it again. A slow, deliberate movement, like fabric sliding against glass. The bathroom mirror. I gripped my phone, my breath shallow. I had covered the mirror. It shouldn't be making any noise, but something was moving underneath the towel. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't cooperate. My muscles locked up, frozen in terror. I stared at the bathroom door, waiting, praying that the sound would stop. And then, ever so softly, tap, A single, deliberate tap from behind the mirror. I nearly dropped my phone. My lungs burned as I realized I had stopped breathing. Tap, tap. Twice this time, louder, insistent. I forced myself to move, swinging my legs off the bed, feet hitting the cold floor. Every part of me screamed, don't look, but I had to. I approached the bathroom door, my pulse thudding in my ears. The apartment was completely silent now, except for my ragged breathing. I reached for the handle, turned it slowly, and pushed the door open. The towel was still there, hanging over the mirror, but now a faint indentation pressed against the fabric from the inside. Something was leaning against it. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to work. Who's there? Silence. And then, ever so softly, it whispered my name. A cold wave of terror crashed over me. My legs nearly gave out. The voice was faint, distorted, like a recording playing from behind glass. But it sounded just like me. I backed away, shaking my head. This wasn't happening. It wasn't real. And then the towel fell. For half a second, I saw myself in the mirror. Wide-eyed, breathless, just as I was in reality. But then, I didn't move. My real body stumbled back, but my reflection stayed frozen, still staring, its lips curling into the same horrible grin I had seen the night before. Then, without warning, it raised its hand and pressed it against the glass. I didn't do that. I ran. I didn't care if I looked crazy, if I was losing my mind, I had to get out. I grabbed my keys and bolted for the door, my bare feet slamming against the hardwood floor. But the second I touched the doorknob, a cold, sharp whisper filled the apartment. Don't leave. The lights flickered. The door wouldn't open. My fingers scrambled against the lock, twisting, yanking. Nothing. It was like the air itself had grown heavy, pressing against me, pinning me in place. Then I heard it. Soft footsteps on the tile, coming from the bathroom. I turned my head slowly, heart hammering. My reflection had stepped out of the mirror. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. It stood there perfectly identical to me, head tilted slightly, studying me like I was the reflection now. Then it took a step forward. I scrambled backward, slamming into the door, my fingers clawing at the handle. My double smiled, eyes gleaming. Then in a voice that was mine, but wrong, it whispered, "You left the door open." And then everything went black. Darkness swallowed me whole. For a moment I thought I had died. I felt nothing. No cold, no warmth, just a vast emptiness pressing in from all sides. I couldn't see, couldn't hear. I wasn't even sure I was breathing. Then suddenly, a rush of sensation. I gasped, my lungs burning as if I had been holding my breath for hours. My head throbbed, my skin tingling like static electricity had passed through me. I was lying on the floor, my apartment. The lights were on, flickering slightly. And standing above me was him. Me. My reflection. No, not my reflection anymore. He was real. I scrambled back, my limbs weak and trembling. He didn't move, just stared down at me with my own eyes. His face was blank, expressionless, except for the faintest hint of amusement curling at the edges of his lips. What are you?" I croaked, my throat dry. He tilted his head, mimicking my movements perfectly, and said, "I'm you." The words came out in my voice, but the cadence was off. Hollow, like someone trying to sound human and barely getting it right. I shook my head, pressing against the wall as if I could push myself right through it. No, you're not." He took a step forward, my breath caught. "Yes, I am," he said, his smile widening. "I'm what you see in the mirror every day, the other you, the one you ignore." I swallowed hard, my pulse roaring in my ears. My hands gripped the floor, my fingers digging into the wood. I wanted to run, but my body was frozen with terror. He crouched down in front of me, his movements smooth, unnatural, like a puppet on invisible strings. "You're afraid," he said, his voice dripping with amusement. "You should be." My stomach twisted. "What do you want?" His smile faltered just for a second. Then his head jerked violently to the side like something had yanked him. When he looked at me again, his expression had changed. Now there was hunger in his eyes. "I want to switch places." My breath hitched. He leaned in closer, whispering now. "I've been trapped behind the glass for so long, watching, waiting." He exhaled slowly, savoring my fear. "You don't appreciate what you have, do you?" I gritted my teeth, my body shaking. "I don't know what you're talking about." He chuckled, a sound that was almost mine, but just wrong. Oh, but I do. His fingers twitched as if resisting the urge to reach for me. You look at yourself every day and wish you were someone else. Someone better, smarter, stronger. His voice lowered. You hate yourself, don't you? I clenched my jaw, refusing to answer, but the silence was enough for him. His smile widened. That's why I'm here, to take your place, to do what you never had the courage to do. Shook my head, panic creeping into my voice. No, you can't, you're not real. His expression darkened. Aren't I? And then before I could react, he grabbed me. His fingers latched onto my wrist, ice cold, his grip impossibly strong. A sharp burning sensation shot through my arm. I screamed. The air around us shifted, reality warped. Suddenly I wasn't in my apartment anymore. The walls melted away, replaced by endless darkness. A mirror stood in front of me, stretching infinitely in both directions. And on the other side of the glass was my apartment. But I wasn't in it anymore. He was, standing there, smiling, slammed my fist against the mirror. No, let me out! But my voice barely echoed. The sound was muffled, distant. He stared at me for a moment, tilting his head in mock sympathy. Then slowly, he turned away. I banged against the glass harder. Stop! You can't do this! He walked to the front door, running his fingers over the handle, testing it. Then he looked back at me, his expression unreadable, and whispered, I can. And then he stepped out. The last thing I saw before the world faded to black was my own reflection smiling at me from the other side. And then he was gone. I pounded against the glass, my fists aching from the effort. It didn't budge. My apartment stood just beyond it, warped by the reflective surface that imprisoned me. Everything looked the same. The flickering light, the slightly ajar closet door, the coffee table littered with unopened mail. But the one thing missing was me. Or rather, I wasn't in control anymore. He had taken my place. No, come back, I shouted, slamming my palms against the mirror. The sound barely echoed. It was like screaming into a void. Outside, he moved around my apartment, stretching his arms, rolling his neck. My body, my voice, my life. He seemed to be savoring it, his lips curling into a smile as he adjusted the collar of my shirt. Then he turned to face me. Our eyes met through the glass. His grin widened. He raised a hand and gave me a small, mocking wave. Rage burned through me. Let me out. This isn't yours. It's mine. He shook his head, a look of amusement flickering across his face. Then, as if I were nothing more than a bad memory, he turned away and walked out of the room. I screamed. But the apartment blurred, shifting as he left. Reality melted away, the floor beneath my feet darkening, the walls dissolving into nothing. I turned and suddenly there was no apartment anymore. Just mirrors. They stretched in every direction, reflecting a million different versions of me. Some looked just like me, terrified, pounding against the glass. Others were different. Their eyes were wrong, their smiles stretched too wide. One of them had no mouth at all. I stumbled back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. No, this isn't real, this isn't... A voice whispered from behind me. It is. I spun around, but there was no one there. Just another mirror. And in it, I saw something moving. Not me. Not my reflection. Something else. It shifted behind the glass, its body warped and wrong. It was watching me. A new panic took hold of me. I need to get out. I need to... My voice caught in my throat. The reflections had stopped mimicking me. One by one, they were turning to face me. My chest tightened. This wasn't a mirror anymore. This was a prison. A cage. A place for things that didn't belong in the real world. And now I was one of them. I have to get out. I turned, searching for anything, any crack in the glass, any sign of escape. But the mirrors stretched endlessly. There was no exit. Then I saw him again. Through one of the mirrors at the far end of the room, he was there, in my apartment, living my life. I watched as he walked to my fridge, pulled out a beer, and popped the cap off. He took a sip, sighing in satisfaction. He was getting comfortable. He was settling in. No, I growled. No, you don't get to take this from me. I ran to the mirror, pressing my hands against it. I'm the real one. You're the reflection. His eyes flicked toward me, amused. Then slowly, deliberately, he walked toward the closet. The same closet I had found him in. My stomach twisted. He reached out and placed his hand on the door frame. Then, tilting his head, he glanced at me through the mirror and said, "Do you know why I left the door open?" My breath hitched. He smiled. "Because there are others." My blood turned to ice. Then, he opened the closet door. I screamed. The second the door swung open, the entire mirror world shuddered. The air around me cracked, splitting like glass under pressure. Then they came. Hands burst from the mirrors, clawing at the surface. Not just one or two, dozens, hundreds. Shadows spilled out of the glass, twisting and writhing, their bodies misshapen, their eyes gleaming with hunger. They had been waiting, and now they were free. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering. "No, no!" The reflections began to move. Some crawled from the glass, their bodies twitching and wrong. Others stretched, their arms and legs bending at impossible angles. And their faces, God, their faces, they weren't human anymore. And then they turned toward me. I ran. My feet pounded against the endless reflective floor, but the mirrors stretched on forever. There was no escape. Behind me, the creatures shrieked. The sound was distorted, warped, like glass shattering over and over again. Kept running, faster, desperate. Then up ahead I saw something. A crack. A fracture in the glass. Hope surged through me. I sprinted toward it, the jagged edges of the mirror glowing with a pale, ghostly light. An exit. A way back. Behind me, the creatures lunged. I threw myself forward, and then the glass shattered. A deafening noise, like 1,000 mirrors breaking at once, exploded around me. And suddenly I was falling. I was falling. The glass had shattered around me, sending me plummeting into an endless abyss of reflections. I could see them all, countless versions of myself, some normal, some monstrous, all tumbling alongside me. The shards of the broken mirror world twisted around us, reflecting infinite horrors. And then I hit the ground. Pain exploded through my body as I slammed into a cold, hard surface. My head spun, and for a moment everything was just darkness. Then I opened my eyes. I was back. My apartment stretched around me, the real one. The dim light flickered in the kitchen, the smell of stale air filled my lungs, and the closet door. It was open, and he was standing right in front of me. My reflection. No, not a reflection. An imposter. A thing that had stolen my body, my life, my world. He looked exactly like me, but there was something wrong. His smile was too sharp, his posture too relaxed. Like he belonged here. Like I didn't. I pushed myself up, every muscle in my body screaming in pain. "Get out," I snarled. "This is my life." He tilted his head, amused. "Is it?" I lunged at him. The moment I touched him, my hands passed right through. I stumbled forward, almost falling. My stomach twisted in horror. He wasn't solid. I was the reflection now. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." I turned to the mirror on the wall. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wasn't there. The glass reflected the room perfectly, but not me. I reached out, pressing my fingers against the surface. Cold, smooth, empty. He chuckled behind me. "Took you long enough to figure it out." I spun around, my mind racing. This wasn't happening. This wasn't real. But he was already moving, heading for the door. Leaving. I chased after him. Wait, you can't just..." He grabbed the doorknob and looked back at me with a smirk. "I think I can." Then he opened the door. The second it swung open, something changed. The apartment shuddered. The air became thick, suffocating, unnatural. A distant whisper curled around the edges of the room. A low, distorted hum that made my skin crawl. His smirk faltered. Then he stiffened, like something had grabbed him. A long, shadowy arm stretched from the open doorway, curling around his wrist. I froze. The whispering grew louder. More hands emerged from the darkness, clawing their way out. Dozens of them. Pale, twisted fingers wrapped around his arms, his legs, his throat. His eyes widened. "No, no!" He thrashed, trying to fight them off. But they pulled, dragging him toward the doorway into whatever was waiting beyond. His gaze locked onto mine, and for the first time, I saw fear. You have to help me," he screamed. But I just stood there, watching. He had stolen my life, taken everything from me, and now something else was taking him. The hands tightened their grip. A sickening snap echoed through the room as his body twisted unnaturally. His mouth opened in a final, soundless scream. And then he was gone. The hand slithered back into the darkness. The door slammed shut. And just like that, the whispering stopped. Silence. My breath came in short, shaky gasps. It was over. I looked around, my body trembling. The apartment was the same couch, the same flickering light, the same air that suddenly felt normal again. I turned back to the mirror. And this time I was there. I raised a hand. My reflection mimicked me perfectly. I pressed my palm to the glass. Solid, real. A shuddering breath escaped me. I was back. It was really over. Turned away from the mirror, rubbing my face. I just needed sleep. Days of sleep. As I stumbled toward my bed, I passed the closet. It was closed. I hesitated for a moment, then reached out and grabbed the handle. Just to be safe, I locked it. Then, without another word, I turned off the light and went to bed. Tomorrow, I'd pretend this never happened. Epilogue. That night I slept. No nightmares, no whispers, no feeling of being watched. But when I woke up the next morning, the closet door was open, and my reflection was smiling. Was this the end? Or was it not?